Our theme for this episode is Eternal Heaven and Earth. We will explore Laozi's Chapter 7, which can be divided into two main parts. The first part discusses heaven and earth, while the second part focuses on the sage. By contrasting heaven and earth with the sage, we can recall what we read in Chapter 5 about heaven and earth are unkind and the sage is unkind. Heaven and earth face all things, while the sage faces the people. So, why can the sage be compared to heaven and earth? In reality, the sage emulates the Tao. He is the ruler who understands the Tao. His demeanor, much like heaven and earth, encompasses all things, allowing them to live and thrive. Let's first read the original text, Chapter 7. Heaven is long and earth is enduring. The reason heaven and earth can be long-lasting is that they do not live for themselves, hence they can sustain life. Therefore, the sage puts himself behind others and thus stands in front. He does not regard his own life, and as a result, he preserves it. Is this not because he is selfless? Thus, he achieves his private self. This means that heaven and earth can endure because they do not exist for themselves, allowing them to continue. Consequently, the sage places himself after others, yet ends up standing before them. By not prioritizing his own life, he ironically preserves it. Isn't this due to his selflessness? This, in turn, fulfills his private desires. In discussing heaven and earth, the phrase eternal heaven and earth comes from here. When a couple shares a deep bond, they may say, eternal as heaven and earth, until the sea runs dry and rocks crumble. The question is, can heaven and earth truly be eternal? In fact, everything in the universe is in constant flux, and human life is fleeting, so from a human perspective, the concept of eternal heaven and earth seems plausible. It's important to remember that in Laozi's Chapter 23, he also mentions, heaven and earth cannot endure, indicating that we must have a dual understanding of eternity. The existence and role of heaven and earth cannot ultimately last forever. So, why say that heaven and earth are eternal? This is relative to all things. For example, a human may live to be 120, a turtle over 200 years, and a tree may live for thousands of years. However, compared to heaven and earth, these lifespans are insignificant. Therefore, relative to all things, heaven and earth's endurance holds true, as they are like the parents of all, providing the space and conditions for all things to survive and thrive. Heaven and earth, in comparison to all things, are indeed more enduring. The question is, why can heaven and earth endure? Laozi answers, because they do not exist for themselves, meaning they do not seek their own survival. How so? Heaven does not desire to produce more heaven, nor does earth wish to create more earth. They maintain their essence, simply providing the conditions for all things to exist and develop. If anything sought its own survival, it would compete with all others. By not pursuing their own existence, all things can grow according to their nature without pressure, allowing everything in the world to develop freely. Thus, it is noted that heaven and earth do not consider themselves. Moving to the second part, how does the sage act? The sage places himself behind the people, yet ends up in front. Why is this? The sage is the ruler who understands the Tao. After comprehending the Tao, he adopts a humble state, positioning himself behind others, which paradoxically places him ahead. Why? Because people, seeking guidance on the correct way to live and develop, find inspiration from the sage, hoping for his guidance. By standing behind, he achieves leadership through service. Thus, when we talk about being behind and in front, I may walk behind but end up as the leader at the forefront. Next, he states that the sage does not prioritize his own life, resulting in its preservation. This means the sage does not consider his own interests, for he has already grasped the Tao and has no concerns about gains or losses. He does not need to strive for anything or preserve anything. He is the ruler who comprehends the Tao. He seeks to embody the Tao in his actions and speech, enabling the people to feel as if they, like all things, exist between heaven above and earth below, with heaven encompassing all and earth embracing all. The people, akin to all things, can develop freely according to their own conditions within heaven and earth. Thus, the sage's disregard for his own life results in its preservation. Like heaven and earth, he does not compete with all things and does not consider how to advance himself. Consequently, nothing can contest with him, leading to his greatest preservation. The conclusion of this statement is worthy of reflection. Laozi asks, is this not because he is selfless? Thus, he paradoxically fulfills his private desires. This statement can lead to misunderstandings. Some may argue that Laozi's sage ultimately possesses private desires and merely uses selflessness as a means. We believe this interpretation is flawed. Why? Because humans are rational beings capable of thought, and we must distinguish between two concepts, result and purpose. People often conflate these two. For instance, a student may aim to attend university, but the outcome is not guaranteed. If the objective is not achieved, does that render the entire process a waste? Perhaps the student learns valuable knowledge along the way, establishing a certain worldview and values, making this outcome potentially more valuable than the original goal. For example, when we read Laozi today, what is our purpose? To learn more about traditional Chinese culture. Yet, the outcome may not equate to complete mastery. However, every phrase heard, each method of self-cultivation understood, and the reasons for such cultivation may accompany us for a lifetime. For the sage, who is the ruler that comprehends the Tao, his purpose is to govern the people. He does not contemplate his own issues. As he governs the people according to the Tao he understands, he paradoxically ensures his own preservation. To outsiders, it may appear that his selflessness ultimately serves his private desires. This so-called private desire is what ordinary people perceive. For example, one person bravely advances on the battlefield and survives, while another may perish from retreating. These outcomes involve elements of chance. But this doesn't mean that you can save yourself just by wishing to, or that you can succeed simply by wanting it. The purpose one has in mind and the resulting outcome may not always align. Thus, Laozi's sage does not consider his own interests, yet he manages to preserve himself well and lifelong. This is a common observation. In such contexts, we need not overthink the notion that Laozi's sage might still harbor private desires. This is not the case. Laozi simply describes this from the perspective of ordinary individuals, where we can have our own purposes. However, we should view results objectively. The best scenario is, of course, to have a good purpose, yet if that purpose is not achieved, the results may still be quite satisfactory. Thus, in life, whatever we do, we must first distinguish between purpose and outcome. If your purpose is selfish, regardless of the outcome, it is merely a result achieved through means. Even if the outcome is positive, you may feel empty. Conversely, if your purpose is not self-serving, you will feel fulfilled in meeting your responsibilities and acting with a clear conscience. The outcome will then reflect the intrinsic value of your life, affirming your basic dignity as a person. The sage in Laozi's writings is the ruler who comprehends the Tao. While we cannot become such a sage today, we must not forget that over a century after Laozi, Zhuangzi emerged, reminding us to be individuals who understand the Tao. Today, in the 21st century, having learned Laozi and Zhuangzi's Daoist philosophy, we can similarly become individuals who comprehend the Tao, applying our insights to manage our lives effectively. Thus, the issue of private desires discussed in this chapter, selflessness versus selfishness, is worth our contemplation. This means exerting our efforts to do what must be done, leading to positive outcomes. I should not set a fixed objective because once a goal is established, everything I do may become a means to that end. When it becomes a means, I may resort to any means necessary to achieve certain goals, which would diverge from Laozi's philosophy, leading to distorted perceptions and misguided desires with dire consequences. In essence, Laozi states that when we speak of eternal heaven and earth, it is because they do not concern themselves with their own survival, allowing them to endure. This endurance is relative to all things because no matter what, nothing can outlast heaven and earth. The existence and development of all things will always seek to extend and preserve their own life. Is this not self-concern? However, heaven and earth do not have such issues, hence we can say they are eternal. Then, regarding the sage is the ruler who understands the Tao. He never deliberately seeks to govern or attain power. Instead, he exerts his efforts to apply the wisdom he has gained from the Tao in governance, without personal motives in mind. As a result, things naturally turn out well. On the surface, it appears that he has achieved his life's goals, as though he had some self-interest. However, that is not the case. If a person has clear self-interests, they cannot learn and comprehend Taoism effectively. The Tao is the source and destination of all things. Our study of Taoism is aimed at understanding the Tao. When we understand the Tao, we enter a state of natural flow, acting without intent, preserving our true selves. Thus, Laozi's discussions of eternal heaven and earth and the sage clearly inspire us to discern between purpose and outcome. Regarding results that occur naturally, we should accept them, as they arise from our actions. As for personal purposes, they relate to desires, which is a critical consideration in Taoism. Therefore, learning Taoism involves distinguishing the outcomes of many events. In this discernment, we can understand the causal relationships. The reason we can contemplate this overall is that we understand the Tao, allowing us to view outcomes in a way that aligns with the Tao's requirements. This means that by not considering our own interests, we ultimately achieve what we originally aimed to express. This is the content we have learned in this episode. Please reflect on whether you have had experiences like this. You undertake a task, simply doing your duty without expecting any benefits, yet in the end, you receive numerous advantages. Because you did not set out to achieve a specific goal, everything turned out remarkably well. In other words, no matter how you envisioned it, the current outcome is the best scenario possible. So, regarding the distinction between outcome and purpose, do you have any personal observations or experiences in your life to share? I would love to hear your thoughts.